All right, everyone. Welcome back. Part 2 of Restorative Consequences. It's great to see your faces again. I'm glad that you're here. And this is part 2 of our series. What we talked about last time was defining consequences and punishments, kind of what does that really mean? And we spent our time talking about restoration. And today we're in the second section, which is sanctions, which is the more traditional, I would describe that more the traditional school discipline approach of making something unpleasant for a kid in the hopes that they don't repeat the behavior. That's kind of what we think of when we think of sanctions and punishments. And so I'm going to give it a little bit of a different spin that feels better to me as both a restorative practitioner and also I have kind of a behaviorist background. So ways that we can use these sanctions in ways that are more teaching and helpful. And then we're going to continue to talk about accountability and making agreements. So we're going to start with a circle. The first question I have for you as you circle up, I want you to think about it. And the first round is, if you had an unexpected free day, what would you do? And I'll start. If I had an unexpected free day, I would take my daughter to Amsterdam for the day to go shopping. That's what we would do. All right, I'll pass it to Kelly.
If I had an unexpected free day, I'm not sure where, but I would be hiking somewhere. And I think I will go this direction.
If I had an unexpected free day, I would definitely go golfing, probably back down in Palm Springs, because when we did that, it was awesome.
If I had an unexpected free day, I would take my husband to Banff because he's begging to go.
If I had an unexpected free day, I think last time I said that I would organize my garage, and I still am going to do that because I'm not
If I had an unexpected free day, I would fly to Arizona and hang out with friends.
If I had an unexpected free day, I would sleep in.
If I had an unexpected free day, I would go visit my son at OSU that doesn't even go home.
Oh. Okay, Laura, back to you.
Okay. The next question is regarding our last session together when we talked about restorative practices as being part of our kind of response to problem behavior. What have you been thinking about? You know, you walked out of that training thinking something, and it's been, a couple of weeks. What have you been thinking about or even doing with that information? Okay.
Since our last session, I've been thinking about how to kind of put the behavior back on the student, and also how to bring the parents involved with this, because a lot of times it's the frequent flyers with the bullying and the picking on and defiant behavior in classrooms. So that's what
What I've been thinking about since is I need to take time to put up the awesome posters that Nancy gave me with the questions, because even though I haven't memorized, I see some staff don't, and so I want to become more familiar. So I need to take time to find an aid to help me pose those questions.
Since the last time we were talking in our tier 1, or maybe it was our family community engagement team, on how we can share this information with families, and so we put them together for conferences just so we can introduce this idea to families and do a little, talk about how they can use it maybe in their household as well, like station conferences. So
Awesome. Mine is similar, really moving it to helping parents understand the whole process we're going through as well.
I definitely agree. I've been talking or trying to think that how best to communicate with parents kind of on both sides with the offender, but then also with them, because I think a lot of families feel like we're not doing enough. And so just really how best to communicate what we are doing and why it's important.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
So I posted all the questions just at various locations around our school where I find myself needing to have a little conversation with kids. I don't have them yet outside all the classrooms because teachers haven't been fully trained on them. But I've got my staff using them, and I have a whole folder now of things that Kristen and I are going to put together an October workshop for our families.
I've just been thinking about like how to support further training, because I hear little things of what's going on at the buildings. So just even to be able to kind of come and just see it in action, right? I wish that I had a day on my calendar that I just I just need to block a day on my calendar that I don't have anything on it, so that I just go out to buildings to just be in the environment and then see what I'm able to see of what's going on. So.
Right. The next one is I want you to share one thing that you feel positively about in how you're handling discipline at your school. What's going well?
Teachers feel supported.
Nice.
So I'm gonna say I saw like a little meme on a Facebook page that I'm part of, and it said you can't intervene your way out of a tier 1 problem. And I feel like our tier 1 has been really solid and strong, and I feel like it's given us a really good start to the year. It's been very different from last year, and welcome.
Awesome. I would say that getting on the same page as a whole admin and care team, basically, with our school support facilitator and our counselor and myself and the principal using the restorative questions together. There was some resistance last year to do that on some ends, so that's been nice.
Using the restorative questions has really led to what I feel like a lot of accountability, even from like the middle, like the first graders all the way up. And it's just so interesting when they have to sit with that person, like have a conversation with them. And I really feel like that was a piece we were kind of missing before, and it's had a huge impact on relationships and behaviors. So it's really.
What I've realized after using this in our discipline is that it just keeps kids' dignity intact when it's getting their voice heard about the situation as well. And just like that, there's times where kids take it seriously, like, what have I thought about sense? Man, I would really like some support with who I'm sitting next to. Can you give me some strategies? Or what I thought about, they just have such good answers to what I thought about sense. And so I think that I like that it gives kids that time to think and be reflective.
I love that.
I think I feel positive about confidence that I have in asking the questions and then asking more questions with that, and then really making the student talk. Like just sit down and shut up somewhere. Let the student like work their way through whatever is going on.
I love
Yeah, I
it.
would echo that. I feel like the opportunity that I have to ask the questions is usually at a disciplinary hearing, but I think sometimes people come in really guarded and standoffish, and there's obviously a lot of stress. And by the end, when they realize everybody's been able to have a voice, and that really it was mostly about us listening and allowing the student and the family to process through what happened and what happened next. I think most people don't leave. They might not like the outcome, but they don't leave not having been heard or having been able to speak. So
That's good. So the last round is really this like coming at this, this is a small group of people, like that vulnerability of sharing one thing that you would like to improve or change, whether you have control 100% over it or not, but like, what would you like to see different in the way that you handle discipline at your school?
One thing I'd really like to improve is just consistency in response. I feel like we'll have trainings and everyone's really like on board and they're fired, like they feel really passionate about it. And I feel like then when stress hits and it becomes like they default back. And I just, some teachers are really there and some teachers aren't all the way there yet. And I just would love to see it all the way across the board. Everyone like bought in and doing it with fidelity, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. Is the time factor as well is to make sure that it's not one and done and everyone's excited about it. We're starting now, but making sure that we have that at either 20-minute in increments. Sorry, I can't talk this morning. Of time to make sure that we are actually feeling that information and that full reflective piece, so that everyone feels that they were confident about.
Mine was the same consistency. We would just like to work on consistency with all levels of staff in our building on the same.
I just have to be honest, one teacher right now that I struggle to have the restorative chats with, and I like dread it, and I put up my to-do list and I like avoid it because I need to spend more time training them on not using it as a time to rehash the behavior. So
Wow. Yeah.
I would like to improve on like kind of like that. We have a couple teachers in particular that they'll write 7 or 8 referrals a day, and they're legit. Like there's some defined behavior, but I think there's a lot more that can be handled in the classroom that they may or may not have time to, or they may or may not know how to continue teaching while also having this conversation with the student on the side.
I think about this across the district. The thing that I would love to feel like is just an overall improvement is that when students need to be removed from the classroom, that they are returned in a restorative manner. Like that, if that becomes kind of the consistent way that staff feel like they get a chance to not just have a kid return back to their classroom, but that there's a restoration for both the teacher and the class, then I think that's going to be so great for students. And that's kind of my vision of like, that's what I'd like to see. If we focused on one thing, and if that was it, that would be it for me.
Wow, that's great.
So like, honestly, there's so many, but I'm stair stepping myself because myself and my team are so new at all of this that right now I'm just focusing on my team and how do I get my team to have that consistency. And I've already created lots of things to help, and there some I could see the change, but I'm actually looking forward to making the matrix because I want to see us all consistently responding to every student. Because what I've had to do is just like, okay, I'll take this student so that I know I'm consistently responding. You take that student, where it needs to be a fluid thing, where whoever's available can respond. And then my next big stair step is our staff. You know, they see what we're doing, and our triangle is really great right now with our behaviors. It's very few students, but there's not a lot of restoration in our classrooms. Self-helping will put out there.
Thank you for having that great open circle. You can have a seat now. What do we mean when we say consequences in schools? And typically what people are meaning is they mean punishment, right? And in this series, we're actually redefining that a little bit about what are we really talking about here? For a behaviorist, it means giving something to or taking something away from a student following the misbehavior with the hopes that it's going to reduce the likelihood of that behavior occurring again. So you can think of a lot of things we do in schools that we call it a consequence, yet it's not reducing that behavior from occurring again, right? And so a behaviorist would say, oh, that's not actually a punishment. And so that's kind of that tricky thing. A restorative consequence is our entire response to student behavior, including restoration that heals, sanctions that repair, and interventions that teach. So last session, we talked about restoration, and today we're going to talk about sanctions. So the other way of looking at it, visual people, is there's really these kind of three legs of the stool, and the sanction is actually the repair work that needs to happen, the actual steps that kid needs to take to fix it. That's the way I look at it, at least, rather than just punishment, because we know punishment doesn't work. And then intervention is what we're going to talk about next time. So those are the three legs of the stool. And we talked about having a restorative school and the different kind of ways. Do you remember this pathway, that having a different kind of pathway, restorative practices or restorative consequences, and the student in a zero tolerance school, and comparing those two. And so we talked about how a kid's experience at a zero tolerance school would be, the metal detector, that kind of thing. The student was late for first period, so then he's scolded in front of class. He talks back, he gets a detention, then he gets into a fight, gets detained by the school resource officer, suspended from school, held in the juvenile facility. I mean, we spent a little more time on that, but this is the old way we used to do things, and actually things that happened in my, not very long ago, right? And happens currently. In a restorative school, you're really welcoming the students, greeting kids at the door, that kind of thing. Same kid, but the teacher, waits, talks to the kid after class because they have a relationship, sets up a meeting with a counselor, which is an intervention, which we're going to talk about next time. The kid still gets in a fight. So we talked about sometimes we can't prevent everything that's going to happen just because we're a restorative school, right? But in this situation, they sit the kids down together and de-escalate the situation. And as a result, Jason and the other students agree to clean up the cafeteria during the free period. Jason meets with his counselor and the parents to help resolve the conflict at home. What I want to point out in this kind of restorative system versus zero tolerance system is I want you to notice that there are still consequences. So what are the consequences that you see? Compare the zero tolerance consequences to the restorative consequences. So do you want to maybe turn to your partner, see what you think, and then let's do some share out. So there's pieces of interventions and consequences or punishments and things like that in these different paths. So I want you to try to identify what they are. Okay, take one more minute and then we'll do a share out. Okay. Let's see if we can identify what are kind of the consequences and sanctions. Let's try kind of use this synonymously that you see in both of the tracks. So who can find what are the sanctions used in the zero tolerance track?
Holding.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, like right away. And maybe even the metal detector could be kind of like really unpleasant too. But the scolding, okay? What else?
After school.
The detention. Yep. That's another one. Okay. And then
Arrested.
yeah,
Arresting. Yeah.
yeah, he's arrested and
Suspended.
suspended. And then
Juvenile.
Missing school.
yeah, like all of it. Like pretty much every step there's a sanction happening for him. Okay. Let's look at the restorative. What kind of sanctions do you see in the restorative? Because it's there. It's not completely absent.
The teacher speaks to him after class about being late.
It could be. Yeah, the kids don't love that. They don't love it. Yeah. Uh-huh. Absolutely.
I just said counselor meeting, but I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, the counselor meeting, I would call that an intervention, probably, unless they just really don't want to go. But typically they see that for what it is. The school staff intervening and sit down, I would call that a restoration. Like that conversation would be more of a restoration conversation. However, if it's being done during lunch or a time he doesn't want to do it, that's also sanction, right? Okay. And the last step.
Cleaning the
Cafeteria.
So as you can see, there's certainly not as many sanctions or negative kind of consequence type things as there is in the zero tolerance, but they're there. And however, they're all more relational, like talking to the teacher, maybe talking to other people, and they're like repair work, like cleaning. And then there's interventions in there too. So that's what we're going to kind of tease apart now is like, how do you do all of these things together? But like, let's first kind of look at what the sanction part really is. Okay. So remember, we're going to keep in mind the neurobiology here and how a lot of our students come to us with a lot of stress and trauma. Usually the kids that are misbehaving the most, they have trauma backgrounds. And so we're really looking at an issue with cortisol in their system. And we know the antidote to that is the love hormone, the oxytocin cascade, which comes from trust, relationships, and connection. So kind of at all costs, these are things that we don't want to disrupt, right? We want to wash their brain all day long with oxytocin so that they trust us, they have relationships, they have connections so that their brain can heal, their behavior will improve. We also are doing all of this work that we're talking about to help with teacher stress. So the studies about teacher stress are significant, and that this is just a review of last time, that teacher stress tends to impact their students. That in the research with burnt out and stressed out teachers versus a normal teacher, the students' cortisol levels actually matched their teacher's stress level. So if you have a kid that's undergone stress, trauma, and you put them in a class of a teacher that's very highly stressed, it's really not good for either of them. And so what we want to do is we really want to focus on the well-being, not just of students, but of teachers as well, and restorative practices and having people feel supported as teachers. That's really going to help their well-being. Zero tolerance, not helpful, right? It's not changing school safety. Punitive consequences, like what we just saw in that pathway, reduce motivations, not teaching the new behavior, increases all the things we don't want, like truancy, vandalism, aggression, and it's not actually changing the behavior. So what we need to think about is that we're wasting our time with traditional approaches. And that's where restorative consequences kind of come in, is we're not going to waste our time anymore with that. Okay. Can't punish kids into being good. And we also are working on diversity, equity, and inclusion around by weaving in restorative responses and with PBIS. Both of these things are going to help with equity issues at your school. Okay, so we did restoration, and we define that as restoration heals relationships, repairs harm, and it helps people come back into the community together. Mainly it's proactive, it's classroom-based, and 20% of the time it's responsive, and that's what we talked about last time. So what we want to do is, other than like you talked about doing different restorative chats and things like that, we want to layer in the idea of that sanctions are not completely disappearing out of your system. And part of the problem, I think, for us is we're moving from a very traditional punitive system to a restorative one. And right now you're straddling both worlds, right? You have teachers, parents that are expecting a consequence or punishment. I mean, we know this is all true, right? And then you have kids that that's not what they need. If we really care about changing behavior, that's not what we need to do. And so we have leaders that are bravely trying new things, and then they keep getting like kicked in the teeth because they feel like their teachers are disappointed or the other parents are upset with them. And I've kind of developed this idea of the restorative consequence by maintaining that there is a place for sanctions for now. Now, a restorative practitioner really would tell you probably don't need sanctions at all. That being said, if you really follow up and you look at real restorative conferencing and circles, there is almost always some sort of restitution that's going to occur by the end of that conversation. So what's our very last question in restorative practices? Turn to your partner and tell them, what's the last question we ask when we have our restorative questions?
Is right.
Yeah. What do we need to do to make it right? And you know what? It's not always say you're sorry, right? Often there's some things that kid needs to do. So what are some examples that you all have seen in your experience with a restorative conversation that the kid actually had to do something differently or for the other person? So anybody have an example?
Hi, Laura, I love that question because sometimes kids are like, I need to bring my materials to class so I'm more focused. So they're being actually like so thoughtful that I'm being distracted and talking to a neighbor because I don't have my materials. So I'm just like hanging out. So they're like, I will bring my materials or I need to ask to go to the bathroom to, wash my hands and get ready and then come back. So they like come up with actually explicit things. But my favorite answer the other day was a kid who said, whatever she wants, and then pointed to the teacher.
Well,
so, anyway,
you prepped him well then.
it made us giggle because we were like, okay. And she's like, well, I just want you to be focused. And so he was like, well, I can do that. So I don't know. Sometimes it ended that one in a light manner.
And that's been my experience, honestly, is the same as you. When you really get the kid and the teacher and they're, the kid can say what they need, the teacher can say what they need. Let's just work together, But sometimes like actual harm has occurred, right? And there's something that needs to be fixed, something that needs to be replaced, repaired. Has anybody have an example of like something the kid needed to do, like as a follow-up?
I have an example of two students that damaged the bathroom door. And so they, one wanted to fix it right away and one didn't know what. So the other one kind of modeled for the other student how to be more restorative for the work of our maintenance. So we arranged it for them to stay after school and use tools with her guidance, and they fixed the door. So it was good. Yeah, it didn't happen again. So
that's so great. Yeah.
We didn't do it this year, but last year we had two boys fight. There were 6th grade students that got into a fight. And so one of the steps that we took was they did like the Safe Schools modules on resolving disagreements. And then they had to create a poster and go and present it to 3rd grade and just like tell them, like, if you're out at recess, this is things that you can do instead of getting angry. And they actually were really proud of themselves afterwards too.
That's awesome.
I need those names because they're my 7th graders.
Yeah. Show them the poster.
Mm-hmm.
And just the obvious, like making a mess in the cafeteria and then having to clean it up.
yeah.
And then spending time just, even building that relationship with the custodian because they
Yeah.
always think of apology
Yeah.
and then learning how to clean up, like it's not just like a wipe things, but why does he use this material, that one, and what. the
I love
process
that. Yeah, yeah.
Learning
That's cool.
experience too.
That's
That
cool.
happened with our school garden when the kids took baseball bats to it. And I had them apologize to the custodian, and then also they not apologize, but have a restorative chat with the garden coordinator for our district. And then the students who built the garden, the students who built the garden one was tough, because they were like, this, this is, I bet, I was looking forward to eating that food. I don't know, it was awesome, but the kids came up with, you should have to help us in the garden. So then they had to help in the garden on their off time. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So like you all have this down then. So in this model, those are all sanctions, right? They're the things the kid needs to do that wouldn't be what they would be doing normally on their free time. Typically, it's something that they didn't, that it was negotiated or asked of them in the context of the restorative meeting. Now, you can absolutely assign a sanction still, just don't mistake that for being restorative. Because to be restorative, you have to involve the people that were harmed. So the way I define sanction is the effort, the steps that the student needs to bring forward to repair the harm. It can be an apology letter and that kind of thing, but really we're talking about concrete steps. Basically, and we'll talk about examples, but restitution, things like that. So when we're talking about sanctions, these are kind of the criteria that, the things you're going to use. It should be if you're going to be restorative, it needs to be decided upon with the people impacted. So sitting in your office and it being assigned trash pickup, while it's a logical consequence, it's not necessarily restorative unless it's in the context of a restorative conversation and the people that were impacted say, I want him to pick up trash, right? Otherwise, you're just assigning a logical consequence, which is way better than an exclusionary one, but it's still a sanction that's not restorative. It needs to be related to the misbehavior. Think logical, natural kind of consequences, not things that are unrelated. And that's one issue with like suspensions and detentions and things like that. Right. They're simple for us, but they're not typically related to what's going on, which is why they don't work. They're not teaching anything new. Yes, go ahead.
That's where it's the most help, I think, with that matrix is, I want the sanction. I need to change my word from consequence. So I'm going to get in that habit. I want that sanction to be related, because if the goal is to change behavior, right, it should be related. And so that's where I need some help, because some of them are a little more obvious, like, oh, you had a tobacco infraction, we're going to have you, let's talk to someone about what tobacco can do to your system, or, oh, you hurt someone, or let's restore that by having a conversation. But sometimes it's like disruption, and I'm like, other than an apology, I don't know where else to go,
Yeah.
So for some of it, I just feel like disrespect. I can have you watch a video and respect, and we can have a conversation and a reteach, but then I feel like I need more tools. So that's what I'd like help with.
Yeah. So we should talk about that. And some are a little trickier than others. And, I think that disruption and disrespect, typically it's a relationship problem. Disrespect is a relationship problem 100% of the time, and can't really be sanctioned away. That's just in short the way I think of that. Disruptive behavior is often in need of an intervention, like an academic intervention, right? Because is it a won't, is it a can't, what's going on? But it doesn't mean that we can't have these restorative conversations, get to the bottom of what's going on and look at function and then go from there. But we'll talk about that too, of like how to look at function.
Sure.
Sorry, did you have a follow-up question?
Just said thank you, sorry.
Yeah. So the other one is just to deliver things respectfully. If you are going to deliver a sanction, it's respectful. In a restorative conversation, when we answer what needs to happen to make things right, the delivery of the sanction would be someone asking, I would like you to blank, blank, and blank. And sometimes the kids will just suggest it. I've had kids suggest really interesting things. Like in a bullying situation, I had a kid say, I'm going to walk you to your car, when your grandma picks you up, and I'm going to check in with your grandma every day and tell her you had a good day. Like, this is like a kid who had been bullying the other kid. like that was his idea. So they're going to come up with their own things as well. You don't need to deliver it per se if you've had a conversation, but it's decided upon like that. It should be reasonable. So we're not, like cleaning floors with toothbrushes. It should be non-shaming. We're not, I remember one time a parent was like, well, I want that student's picture on the front of the school in a marquee with the label bully on the top. So everyone,
Wow.
yeah, we don't do that either. And so some of that could be like non-shaming is if you do things like classroom beautification, when are you doing that? We don't want it to be like, oh, these are the kids in the, wearing like the jumpers, picking up trash. Well, we don't want to do that. And so it has to be non-shaming. Now there is a place for school jobs, and I'm a big fan of school jobs, which can be privileges and they can be also sanctions or consequences. So I think you should, and we'll talk more about that. But you want to do all that in non-shaming ways, non-exclusionary if you can, because we've been there, done that, sending kids out of the room, out of the school, like it's just not helpful. And it needs to be meaningful to the person that did the harm and the person that was harmed, but mainly for the person that was harmed. That's really the person who would decide what do they need for things to be made right. And the job of the person who did the harm is to like try to make that happen. So that's kind of the criteria that I think of. I want you to kind of reflect with your partner, and then we're going to do a share out of like what, like when you see this list, what do you think about? Okay, so I want you to reflect a little bit about what comes to mind when you see this. Okay, let's come on back. Per each pair, what came up in your conversation?
I think of like, my current boss called it the pound of flesh mentality. We have some staff members who want their pound of flesh, and I'm like, okay, consequencing this kid is not going to motivate them in that way. But I also have to change some of my honest perception. I'm not just trying to put on staff members, but like sometimes it's like, we will not honor them at senior night because they don't have passing grades. Really? So it's not letting that kid's name be called out on the intercom. He's not even played a whole game this year because of his grades, but you don't even want his name called out. Like, come on, like that's so, what is that going to do to this kid? He's a senior,
There is a piece of us somehow in education that we have allowed things to go on for a long time with our colleagues. We don't ever say anything. We just like, it's not my business. And we don't really, and we see kids getting hurt. And it's just never been okay. And now I think we have more language and an ability to like support people, and not just say, cut it out. But we've been complicit in this. All of us have. We've seen stuff happen and we haven't thought we had a role in making it stop. And so but we're fixing it now, right? We're working on that, but it's really difficult. And I think thinking about like, if that was my kid, like, we should look at all of our kids like that. So I don't think you're wrong. I think it's good. Keep doing it. Okay. Another group. What came to mind? What came up in your conversation about this list?
We talked about where it says decided upon with people impacted, and how like at the elementary level or like with the younger students that a lot of times they may not know what they need. And so a lot of times they're just like, I don't know, you should say sorry. And so just how we also have to take the time to like teach them what it means when we say, what do we need and how do we, teaching with them.
And some of that's going to happen in your prep work as well. So we talked about that last session, but if you're bringing two people together, if it's significant enough, now with kids on the fly and they're used to it, you don't need a lot of prep, but you might help that kid think about, well, what do you need to do to make this right? Here's, do you want to hear about what other kids have done to help their teachers? Like I do a lot of things like that. And give them ideas, help your teachers come up with ideas. That way, when people come together, they have kind of some things that they're thinking about. But I have to tell you that people come into restorative conversation saying, I want this, this, and this, and not 100%, but often they want something very different at the end than when they started. And that is okay, because they now have a face-to-face conversation. It's a different experience. They start to feel and think differently, and they can change what they want to do. So, yeah. Okay. And the last pair, what came up for you guys?
We kind of talked about the same thing where sometimes the kids are just like, I just want it to stop. Like I want you to stop. I don't want you to do this again. So what you guys were just saying along the same lines, and I love the idea of like having some ideas to present, like here are some things that people have asked for in the past.
Yes.
Because it's just so natural for them to just think about like, I just want it to stop. That's it. Please stop.
Right. And coming up with like some ideas yourself as a restorative practitioner, we're taught and you're taught, don't go into these like as the facilitator with preset ideas of what you think should occur. That's not restorative, right? They need to decide. However, in practice with children, it is really helpful if you kind of help them brainstorm before going into these conversations some things that they could offer to make things right. They want to do it. They just don't know what. It's not a bad thing. But I like how you phrased it. Do you want to know what other kids have asked for in the same situation rather than you saying, well, here's what I think you should do, and give them a few things to just think about. They don't have to. But if you think you're going to be walking into like a difficult restorative conference where, I've had some where kids are going to be asked to actually replace or come up with money or something. It's really helpful to talk about that in advance with them. This might be asked of you. How are you going to respond? And if they panic and they don't have money and stuff, like you want to suss that out before they're asked and put in that situation. So, but you're going to have prep work before conferences and things like that. If it's a high end thing where there's property damage and stuff, so you would know. But basically this is kind of the list of what we want to do. When we do sanction. Okay. So the next part is just acknowledging, and this is actually Jeff Sprague's work, University of Oregon, is that in research, they found that if you have sanctions and you don't have a balance of all the positive acknowledgments, so think your PBIS tickets, your classroom building circles, or community building circles, things like that, it has seriously detrimental effects on youth relations with adults. The relationships break down, reduces the motivation. So all of the things they found, it just doesn't work, right? And according to Rob Horner, also from University of Oregon, there's 4 purposes of a sanction. So this is when to do it, okay? It interrupts the problem behavior. So the kid is like escalating in class, like it needs to stop, right? We have to stop that from happening. And just sitting around in a circle, that's not in the moment, right? Like we'd use circles later to reflect upon what happened, but we have to do something to stop it in the moment. So we have to stop that behavior. So that's a purpose of a sanction. It also is to teach acceptable versus unacceptable behavior. This isn't being respectful. You always want to tie in kind of your school-wide values, your be safe, be respectful, be responsible values. You're teaching in that moment. However, we know that kids can't learn stuff if they're in fight or flight. So you have to teach it at a time that they can hear you. And if you're yelling at someone, they can't hear you because their brain is shut off, right? Number 3, the other purpose is to allow education to continue for other people. Safety, access of to instruction. So that would be Rob's 3rd reason to do a sanction. And the 4th one is to minimize the likelihood that problem behavior will be rewarded. So if someone is shouting out repeatedly in class and about 50% of the time the teacher laughs at him and then calls on him or like answers, and then the other 50% like yells at him for it, right? That's what we want to avoid. And that's that consistency on our end. But these are the 4 criteria that Rob Horner says should be the purpose of what we're doing. So one thing that is kind of helpful is knowing function of behavior. And this is something that I know you've worked on in your district a lot, but we want to minimize the likelihood that the problem behavior will be rewarded. So knowing why the kid is doing what they're doing, meaning what's the payoff for him, is super important so that we know we're not rewarding the behavior. So here we go. Here's a case study. A student disrupts class in order to get out of the math test. Which sanction is better? Send the student home for the remainder of the day or send the student to another room to take the test? Right. So often when kids misbehave and their function is to avoid the task of whatever the learning is, we quickly remove the expectation of them learning. And instead they get to take a walk, go to the office, sit around and listen in on the secretary's private lives, witness medical emergencies. Like that is the reality of what happens in the office, right? And that's absolutely reinforcing the behavior. I had an alternative high school I worked with once that, kid you not, by like 9 o'clock in the morning, their in-school suspension room was bursting to the brim. Bursting. They had so many kids sent out of class, and it was actually a court school. So all the kids were there because they were in adjudication process. They were in probation, that kind of thing. It was so full. And Jeff Sprague and I were both consulting together and doing some training. And so we built a different system for them. And the system was that if the kids started getting upset, they actually followed some different steps. They could take a break in the back of the room. Then if they're still, they could stand out on the porch, we called it, but it was like that little ramp up to their room. They could take a walk with someone. And then the next step was this room, right? So we actually like made steps so they weren't immediately going there. And if they got to the room, their work was brought to them and they were expected to complete it in that room. And I tell you, like it dropped by 80%, the number of kids going in there, because it was like a super hip, cool place to be. The counselors were in there. The school resource officer was a very cool guy, Albert Washington. He was there. They wanted to be in that room. And so we changed it so that we never like lifted the expectation that the homework and then the classwork would get finished. They had to do it no matter where they were, made it harder to get into the room. And so we kind of have this whole, like, this is a high school example, but a lot of steps to keep that from getting rewarded, that escape from task. Like, hey, I know there's a more fun place to be right now. Let's go there. And that's just kind of like a systems example of how to help kids not escape task, which, you know, that's like one of the most common functions. The other thing, if you think about it, by implementing a restorative chat process at your school, where they don't go to the office, someone comes to the classroom door, they don't actually get to escape very much. They don't get to escape the work for very long. The whole thing takes maybe 10 minutes at the most, probably 3. And they don't get to escape their teacher, who they're not happy with, right? They have to talk to her or him. And so we're not actually rewarding misbehavior when we do a restorative chat. We're rewarding it a lot less than when we do office referrals. So, oh, that didn't work. Okay. So let's think about together, what are some common sanctions that we use that might actually be rewarding the behavior? And I'll fix this slide because I was trying to get a slide within a slide. But what are some sanctions that could be meeting the 4 criteria that Rob Horner kind of outlined? Okay, so talk to your partner while I fix this slide. Okay, let's just do a quick share out. What are some common sanctions that we use in schools that could actually be rewarding the problem behavior? Just let's maybe each group, we're going to each share one until we run out. Okay, here, let's start with first group here. We can go like a clock.
That's us.
I think just building on what you were sharing, I think we have a lot of teachers that are like, well, go take a break or go fill out a reflection sheet in another classroom. And it's getting, but it actually is getting them out of the work that they weren't wanting to do.
Okay.
And they just get like some free time in another classroom and they start wanting more breaks and they kind of are looking for reasons to take a break.
Mm-hmm.
So leaving the class in any way, and which it can be a really important intervention, but you have to use it correctly. Yeah. Like break cards, things like that is a structured behavioral intervention, but if used incorrectly, it's a reward for, the escaping class. Yeah. Okay. Next group.
I had one time where a kid made a mess in the cafeteria. And together they decided, the custodian and the student, to have that student help clean up. So it was still through the restorative process, and it's what they decided upon. But the custodian set it up to happen when the kid was in math class. And so the kid was missing math class, which he did not like, to then go hang out with Frank, who was this awesome guy. And so it's just like, nope, we're not going to have it be out of academic time. So even using a awesomely restorative and it worked and it was exactly what the behavior was meeting, but the timing of the day was not.
Right. That's like, whoops. Yeah. We missed the boat on that one. That's funny. Yeah, exactly. All right. Next group.
We had the same one, so I'm just trying to think off right now. But probably I would say maybe for a different function of like getting peer attention or adult attention, and those teachers that are adamant about having that conversation with that kiddo, like right there in front of everybody, and just kind of stopping the instruction to get in a battle with, a 10-year-old.
And he's like, bring it on. This is
exactly. And then
what I'm looking for. Yeah.
Interesting to like see the look on kids' faces sometimes when that's the function of their behavior, because they almost have like a smile and a smirk, like, oh yeah, let's do this, right? Like they're looking at their peers or that one peer that they're actually the most trying to be, the audience, and they're just they love it. They love it.
All right. And what else? Kelly, do you have one?
Yeah, I mean, I heard of several groups just say suspension, like if it's
That's
like
the obvious,
drug,
but
drug incident or whatever it is, suspension, like great, now I'm at home, get to smoke my weed or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So really, I mean, what's interesting is exclusionary discipline in general, that's like leaving class, leaving school, is incredibly rewarding for kids that don't like school. Right. And so that's just like, we're missing the boat in such an obvious way on that one. And then I love your examples of like getting attention for negative behavior. We dole it out really freely, don't we? And it's like, obviously this isn't going to work. So have you tried or think of like a sanction that actually meets Rob Horner's criteria, or at least some of those? What are some sanctions you've seen that you're like, hey, that one actually did do that? Now that you see what Rob Horner, who is a like master behaviorist, right?
So like
kind of
teaching, like reteaching of the expectations, or going through like those safe schools lessons. Well, I didn't necessarily track the effectiveness, which is something I'd want to do in the future, but like having students go through and relearn the expected behavior, and it's not occurring where we're suspending them. Like we find the time, like I did it during advisory last year. I think that was it interrupted that we stopped the behavior from happening. They got to be taught on what they should be doing. Learning continued for everyone in that kid. And I don't know if 4 necessarily happened because I didn't track it with data, but I should have.
Yeah. And think about the very basic PBIS response to behavior. What do you do when a kid is running down the hall? We say, come back and show me you know how to walk, right? That's the rule. That's the PBS response. And it meets all of these things. The kid is interested in running. They do not want to walk back to you, because the function of running is to get there fast, right? They want to get there. When you call them back to you to redo it, it's a sanction. It just is, right? They don't want to come and talk to you at recess. And so it's teaching, right? And it's likelihood of them, I remember I had a school that like, it was a middle school and everybody was chewing gum. It was a huge problem, right? And all we did is like, as soon as anybody saw someone chewing gum, they were asked to spit it out, because they were doing they were literally like the chewing gum Nazi kind of school, where they were having kids scrape gum. They were like making them like on the step, where they were like not even walking at their 8th grade graduation because they were caught chewing gum. I mean, it was like crazy. They were so into it. At another middle school, they were all about wearing hoods, right? We sometimes create these problems. Like we don't need to. But anyway, when every single adult that ran into the kid had them spit their gum out, and so the kid would have the gum for 5 minutes and keep spitting, like the whole thing went away. And so it interrupted the behavior. They talked about why it was damaging for the school, because they're having all this gum stuff. It's like sometimes just asking the kid to come back and pick up their trash, it's sanction enough, because they don't want to do it. They don't want to come back. They don't want to spit out their gum. And so it kind of can meet the criteria. And so the very basic PBIS response to problem behavior meets these 4 typically. So that's something to think about. So when you have your system, we've talked about, you always need to teach your teachers to calibrate that these are the classroom behaviors you're going to manage yourself in the classroom. These are the things that are office managed. And a couple of you brought that up in that conversation around what would I like to see differently? What would we want to do? you talked about that, like tier 1, teachers need more skills of what to do in the classroom to keep them from getting the call either for the chat or to send them to the office. So that always needs to be part of it. Teachers need, training on developing their own continuum of responses, that they don't have to be lockstep the same with every teacher. They need to pick a few things that they can do in their class to redirect behavior. And this list is in your handouts, but it's certainly not, I have much longer list, but it's not comprehensive. There's lots of wonderful interventions that teachers use that are respectful, that are positive and effective, that are not shaming, and they meet all the criteria we talked about. I don't have a problem with a teacher asking a kid to stay back and talk to them, right? Now, what happened with that, though, is it turned into school-wide systems of benching kids at recess or lunch detentions and things like that, that when it becomes a system instead of a relationship repair, that's when we have problems. But a teacher said, like, you've been messing around the whole math class, come back and let's talk after class, have the restorative conversation. Let's look at your math together. Like, that's like an amazing intervention, right? And an absolute sanction, because that's not what they want to do. But it does tend to help a lot. So staying in at recess, staying after school as a system, not great. As in one-on-one, like intervention repair, it's absolutely something we should be doing, but you can't outsource it as a teacher. You can't say, go sit on the bench all of recess because you weren't doing your work, right? You need to let's spend some time together and connect and talk about why you're not doing your work. But that's not on the list, right? Because this is, it doesn't have every single thing that people do. But people need to develop their own, in a sense, and make some common agreements in the school that they're going to handle these kind of behaviors in class. They're going to choose several strategies before asking for help. And then they know, you have like systems at your school where you should have phone calls going home with misbehavior, that the person who was the one that dealt with the student should be the one to call home. Typically, if it's like a teacher or certificated staff, mixed results on having classified staff call home. When you have bus drivers call home and aides, it can kind of go sideways sometimes. So at least if the classroom teacher does it, it tends to be better. So again, you don't want to outsource this relationship building with the parent either, that the person that was with the kid should be the one to call. But calling home is a sanction, right? The kid doesn't want you to do it.
Are you saying for are you saying for minors and majors, that should be the parent, the staff who dealt with the student? Because we typically do minors should be called by the staff, but then if it's a major, the admin calls home.
If I think it's situation specific more than major or minor, but if that teacher was there, but if you also were literally involved because it was such a big deal, then you were there and you can speak to the parent about what occurred. But yeah, I mean, if a kid is cussing out a teacher to their face, think about this. Some of these things on the major list, it would be great if they were calling home, but maybe it needs to be actual, like parents come in and we have a restorative conversation and you help with that, But yeah, I think it really depends on the situation. As much as you can, you want the person that was there to answer the questions and hear the nuance of that, and help the parent know that their kid isn't a terrible kid. And I have a video on my YouTube channel, parent phone call script. You can download off my website that you can use as like a staff training tool of like do's and don'ts in calling home. I think it's like 6 minutes, but that might be something that you do to like introduce this idea of calling home. I have some school districts where people have always called parents and have really tight bonds. Other ones are like, what? Call the parents? Like I would never call up, and it's cultural based on like the school's history and the school district's history. And it's something, if you're not doing it, we want to revive it.
Will you be updating that for do's and don'ts of sending text messages to families?
So I don't recommend it.
I think sometimes those staff like having the paper copy because then it holds like their back that on this date, we had this conversation about this thing, and instead of, well, you never told me about this,
Right.
or I don't remember you saying that my kid could retake this test. I don't know. So that's what's hard, is sometimes I know teachers like the paper version to be like a fallback. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so having a paper version is fine. It just doesn't need to go home.
Okay, that makes sense. So keep for
Yeah.
our own documentation. And
I
let
would
the student-
document and then you contact parents, yeah. But you don't necessarily need to, you don't want to send that stuff home. Basically, keeping a written record or sending home a written record of how terrible their kid is a really bad way to foster relationships with parents. Much better, pick up the phone. Hi, this is Laura Moyman. I'm, Tanya's math teacher. Just want to tell you, that. And so in the video, I do talk about starting with the positive, share the problem, but really encourage the parent. And the script that I have, this one that you can download from my website, is actually, I got it from Stephen Smith from the University of Oregon, because they found that when people sent these office referrals home, it was setting kids up for abuse and like really severing the relationships that parents had with the school. So it was not a good tool to like get their cooperation and any of those things. And it's simple. You just don't send the paper home. We need it for data collection, right? And for Swiss or whatever you guys are doing, Synergy. But you don't actually need to send it home. You can just call. And if it's you calling instead of the teacher, that might be more appropriate. Depends on the situation. So that's a sanction that we should be doing as a system, right? That's like communicating with parents. And the other thing I talk about in the video is if the kid has faced consequences, like missed part of their day, like stayed in at recess, had a detention, sent out of class, like the parent needs to be informed of those things, because that's actually their missing part of their school day. And in a lot of states, that parents should be informed of those things. So that's something to think about. So the office referral shouldn't have parent signature, whatever you guys are using, you don't want parents to get that in like home. Phone call is better. Also thinking about, reflection sheets in general. A lot of people use reflection sheets. It's important that we try to use the restorative questions for reflecting, like sending the kid to go think. But, we know that kids are not particularly reflective in isolation. This idea of like time out has, really the idea is we need time in kids. It's fine to sit out, calm down. But when we process what happened, we should do it verbally. So a lot of people are having kids go sit and fill out forms. It's okay, like for a few minutes, but that's not solving anything. It's helping them, at most, it's helping them know what you're going to talk about, like looking at the reflection sheet. But kids typically don't feel very reflective when they're sitting there. They feel wronged, they feel misunderstood, and they need an opportunity to share their story and to connect with you in that moment. And so this is, here, this is a picture of a yard supervisor having a restorative conversation with these 3 girls at recess. And these are the things at restorative schools that are happening all the time, helping kids solve conflicts, and work out, problems and things like that. So your school, I know, has like systems and flow charts. So those things are really good. We just want to incorporate the restorative steps in here. And I thought it might be good, Kelly, you referred in your handbook that if you want to point out to them that you have some of these resources in the Lincoln County handbook on page 28 and 32. Do you have that, like where you could pull it up and show them? I thought we could take a minute to just show them the resources that you've already built. And you have a table of suggested responses, function of behavior table there, which I think could help people if they knew where it was, come up with maybe responses that don't actually reinforce the problem behavior.
Right. In our PBIS staff handbook in module 3 and 4, both of those modules have those pages that have the function of behavior. It kind of introduces it on module 3, and then it goes into more detail in module 4 on page 32. And it's got some activities that are attached to it. So, and then if you go to the training video for each of those modules, you can fast forward to the section of the video where it goes over those pages in the handbook. So either whether it's reviewing it for yourself or whether you want to do like some, refresher, like PD with your staff on it and return them back to those pages of the handbook. It's in both modules. And
Has
introduces it.
anybody here really looked at that or had time to kind of, or used it?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's, just kind of circling back, and we're going to take a break. So I want to, just encourage you you have some great resources, and going back to some of that stuff, especially if it's not new for your staff, can really be helpful in helping people know restorative practices. It's not new. We've been doing this a long time. This is in the manual. This is a great way to think about function of behavior, not rewarding. So when we come back off break, we're going to do a very simple correction sequence from the PBI strategy that I recommend training all of your staff to do. And then we're going to talk about some other sanctions that would be preferable to exclusion. Okay, see you in a few. All right, are we ready to come back? Sounds like you had a really interesting discussion over break. All right, well, let's one of the most practical, very first lines of responding to problem behavior can be found in this simple correction sequence from the University of Oregon. And it's similar to something that you've been taught before, according to Kelly, and it's more simple. So we thought, let's give this a shot, see if you think people will have a little easier time. It's also explicitly trained in your online course. And I have a separate standalone YouTube video called the Simple Correction Sequence. If you just want to do like the 3-minute version for your staff. The nice thing about my YouTube videos is you can just send them in links in newsletters and things like that people can watch and then give feedback on, right? If they think that would work. So here's how the simple correction sequence works. The first thing that we do in PBIS is we restate the expectation. Even better, you ask the kid, what's the rule, right? So the kid's running down the hallway, you say, whoa, come back. What's the rule in the hallway, right? So the kid so just by nature of you saying, whoa, come back and talk to me, that's a sanction. That's not what they want to be doing, right? They've run off, they're doing something else. Just talking to a teacher, I know that hurts our feelings, but if you think about it in a behavioral sense, whatever they're doing, the function of their behavior is typically not being achieved by them having to walk over and talk to you about it. They don't want to do it, typically. They may want attention, but not yours, right? Usually. And if they do want your attention, then this is a great intervention. So first thing you do is you restate the expectation. Walking in the hallway, swinging, what are the rule on the swings? What's the rule about cell phones in class, right? Then you simply ask the kid, can you show me? If the kid can do it, then you say, thank you, and it's over. We don't write it down. It doesn't go into your data collection system. It's over. You say, thank you. Really appreciate you taking responsibility. And then make a point next time you see that kid smiling, praise them, develop a relationship, right? If they don't do it, then you give them a simple choice. And the simple choice goes like this. You ask them to do the expectation. So, please put your phone away then, right? Or please, show me you know how to swing and they're not doing it. Okay. Your choice is you can swing correctly. It's usually something like they're acting crazy on the slide or, something like that. Show me you know how to go down correctly on the slide. We don't climb up, right? If they don't do it, then you give them a choice. Do it the right way, or they're going to face a low-level consequence. And the low-level consequence, the kind of formula would be, it needs to be something that individual staff member has control over, that they can follow through with. So you don't want to be like, well, you're going to have to stay after school. Well, if you're not there, how are you going to make that happen? And the kids, well, I take the bus and all this stuff. So try to be, if it's a recess thing, then you're going to need to walk with me at recess. And we're going to talk about the problem. It can be, you're going to need to hand your phone over to me. That's the consequence, right? So you give the kid kind of the option, follow the rule or face a low-level consequence. And then you say, and here's the secret sauce, I'm going to give you a minute to decide. You physically move your body away, turn, talk to some other kids. How's it going? Maybe not a full minute, but then you come back to the kid and you say, so what did you decide? by removing yourself and not staring them down, right?
Sorry.
It's like it changes what happens in their brain. When we stare people down and we look very stern, then their brain goes into fight or flight. They stop thinking, they can't process information. They're just in their limbic system, which is react, animal brain, that kind of thing. If you move your body away, you talk to other couple kids, you keep your face really neutral, and you come back and you say, what did you decide? That 90% of the time, they're going to make the right choice. They're going to just, fine, I'll put my phone away, right? Like they don't want to hand it over. Their brain has told them, hey, I'm going to comply, so I don't have to do that other thing. So most often it works. Now, if it doesn't work, if it works, you just say thank you. Again, don't need to write it down, okay? If it doesn't work, you just deliver the consequence. Looks like you're going to need to walk with me a little bit during recess. We're going to talk about it, okay? Looks like you're going to need to hand that phone over. You've made that decision. Now, here's the thing. If you deliver the consequence and they keep arguing and it's escalating, then we step into the 2-minute rule. And the 2-minute rule, also from University of Oregon, says that if you can't successfully correct the behavior within 2 minutes and you've been reasonable, you've been respectful in your tone, then it should be referred to an alternate setting, an alternate staff member. Probably people's, temperatures are way too high. The kid is too upset, or you're going to get in a power struggle here, and we don't want that. And so basically what's happening is if you've been calm and reasonable and respectful and the kid is still not complying, they're waving that red flag. They're telling you there's something else going on. It's not about you. It's not about here. It's not about now. It's something else. And you need to pass that to another person. The other reason for the 2-minute rule is generally the staff member is supposed to be supervising large groups of people or teaching or something like that. And they can't spend 10 minutes on this, especially 10 minutes. It's going to go nowhere, right? And so that's kind of how that can work. So let's do this. So I'm going to put it back up and I want you to turn to your partner. You don't have to actually do it, but I want you to talk through. A student is running back and forth in front of the swings. You've already told him to stop, but he's done it again. And how many secondary people do we have here? Just one? Two? Okay. One of the secondary people, you guys can sit together, trade partners, okay? Because I'm going to give you a different scenario. Let's see. So here's this could be for anyone, actually. After lunch, a group of students leave a huge mess behind. Food and wrappers all over the table, on the floor. I want you to use the simple correction sequence to ask the students to return to clean it up. Most of them return and comply, but one student's still going to refuse, okay? So let's all do this one. That way you don't have to move, right? This is pretty similar. So I want you to first talk through the steps. You don't have to role play it, but how would you do that? So I'll put it back up for you to look at. So you have a big group of kids. You're going to ask them to, what's the rule, all that. Okay? They all do it. You say thank you. And you have one kid who's like arguing and having a hard time with it. And you're going to do step 3 with him. Okay. So I want you to talk through with your partner. How would you handle that using the simple correction sequence? Okay. I'm going to give you a few minutes to talk it through. All right. Let's come on back. So let's share out what came up in your conversations. Can somebody give this a shot? What would they do? How would that roll when you had a group of kids who basically can kind of comply? How would you start with a group of kids who are leaving a mess? What would you say? State 1.
Restate the expectations. Can you show me? And we're talking about the right-hand side where they're not, right? And then so we just talked about giving them a choice. Like you can clean up by yourself right now, or, I can help you clean up. What choice is best for you? And then give them some time to think about it and wait.
Okay, good. So how would you start it out? What would you have said to the whole group before you did the choice thing? Because the whole group is going to comply with you, but one kid's not. So what would you have said to the whole group in the beginning?
In the beginning?
Mm-hmm.
So just restate the expectation. So what's our expectation around cleaning up our mess in the cafeteria? Or who can tell me?
Yeah, exactly. And then if they can tell you, then you say, can you show me? And then they do it. Now, I've done this before. And what do they always say? when you do
Not
this.
my math.
It's not my
Yes.
stuff. Yeah. It's exactly what they say. And how do you guys handle that? For anybody have?
I usually say, well, the expectation is our tables need to be cleaned. So we're going to need to work together to figure this out because
Yeah.
we can't leave until it's cleaned up.
And we're
And
all
then they
part of
turn
it.
on each other.
Yeah.
And I've done it too. I'm like, well, I really appreciate your help for staying back and helping me with this. I know it wasn't all your stuff. I do that whole restorative side too. That's like high school, middle school, and just like piling the praise because they're complying, right? So the whole deal is like, I'm in number 3 thank you stage because those kids, they hung back and the other kids took off. And then, moving forward, I'd appreciate it if you tell your friends, that they need to be responsible also. And I really appreciate you being responsible. So I've done that too. But you can kind of see how that works. Did any hiccups or questions, like how would this work with maybe other scenarios? Like anything in your conversation that came up? Because it doesn't work for every single thing, right? You would use there might be other times you do other things, but.
We were just talking a little bit about the 2-minute rule also and making sure that everyone involved, let's just say it was in the cafeteria, everyone involved on that duty really understand what that means and how to deliver it. Because I think I had an aha moment because someone had said, oh, I called you in as an admin because it wasn't working with me and I learned it on a video. And so I didn't know that she watched this video yet. So we didn't even talk about it and really calibrate on it. And so it wasn't the quite moment to do that. But now I know what she was talking. And so it took away all the growth, the forward movement of what needed to happen at the table. It could have been we were just brainstorming another person in the cafeteria so that you're working together with that choice, with that student. It was just something I was thinking about.
Yeah, you weren't prepared for it. Yeah, everyone kind of needs to know what they're doing with that. Yeah. Okay.
Laura, can we show the 2-minute rule slide one more time, please?
Yes. There you go. Yeah.
Thank you.
And this is in your video on, I think, responding to problem behavior in the classroom, and it's also in your systematic supervision video or restorative supervision video in your series. So both of those will happen. But if you want to just get just this, I think it's about a 4-minute video on my YouTube channel called the Simple Correction Sequence. And you can just show that in if you want just the standalone version of it. Because it's a great skill and it works really well for most things, but it's not particularly, I wouldn't call it a restorative thing to do. Because in a sense, what's the rule? A little bit my way or the highway, right? We've all agreed on this rule. So do it or else. So that's some of the negative feedback from restorative folks. However, there's times when we have to stop the behavior from happening. This kind of the kids are doing unsafe things and I think it's a really good way, particularly with safety issues, or they're just breaking rules, vandalism, quick stop. It's a respectful way to stop a behavior. How Rob Horner said, and you can always get really restorative, with the consequence, a low-level consequence can be let's spend some time together. Let's talk about it. Let's find a way to fix this. Right. And so you can make it restorative in the end, but initially it's this or this. And that's okay. It's okay to kind of do both. Okay. So that's a skill, a strategy that I want you to have. And this is Rob's quote, power struggles are like mud wrestling with a pig. You both get dirty and the pig loves it. And that's the 2-minute rule. That's why we have it, that you don't want to just keep going and going. That's when you're correcting a kid. If you're having a restorative conversation, a heart to heart, that can be as long as it needs to be, right? That's not what we're talking about. But if you're in a power struggle, we need to time out, we're stopping. It's not productive. So one of the things that I used a lot as a behaviorist and then as a school social worker for sanctions that made more sense to me were loss of privileges. Now, this is a really tricky thing to do. And I say that because like anything, it can kind of be abused, but there's some do's and don'ts to consider. And a lot of it is kind of from my restorative heart, my school mental health heart. So listen to like my tone as I'm talking about it, and hopefully that will help. So a couple of things with loss of privilege you want to be really careful about. The first thing is don't try to take fun stuff away to make school miserable for the kid. That's kind of what people do. If that's your main thing, like I think you were talking about the athlete who couldn't even play in the games, and now they're not even going to say his name, list his name.
That's
as
not
being,
happening. I'm not letting that happen.
that's what I'm saying, like that they wanted that, right? Like that's like, breaks my heart. And the idea is like these are our most disconnected kids, right? That if we just make everything miserable about school for them, no upside at all, we're just breaking relationships, breaking connection, all of that. So you're actually like taking your legs out from under yourself when you do that. You actually want to draw these kids in. And so what's interesting about this is kind of a bird walk, but I've seen it in PBIS schools. So one of them is some PBIS schools have a school reward system that is like, we're going to have a big school-wide like festival or party at the end of the month if we have all these points or whatever. And the kids that don't earn it have to be in this naughty kid room during that event, right? And I mean, I've actually been in meetings with the DOJ and they're like, ixnay on that. Like, that is not cool. And so thinking about like, how can you even use rewards in ways that aren't punishing? But that's the bird walk. But in general, we don't want to try to take stuff away to make kids miserable. It's just going to make everything harder for you and the kid. The other thing is being really clear on what is a right of a student versus a privilege. So the main thing here to think about is, and some of this is regulated by your state, but in general, the normal schedule that a student follows is part of their school day, and it's not a privilege, it's a right. Meaning recess is part of their scheduled school day. So if you are taking it away, it shouldn't be an easy thing to do. It shouldn't be like often. If you're doing it a lot, we need to look at that. I think, like I said, it's fine to be like, hey, but we need to talk. Stay in, let's talk about this. Once, twice, right? Or if you have a kid that they want to be with you and they're going to be your helper at recess, fine. That's a choice, right? That's different. But there's even some states that's like, hey, if that field trip is part of the kid's curriculum, you can't just take it away. And so you have to kind of look and talk to your own administrators in your school district to talk about like, well, what is a privilege? What is a right? I absolutely think, though, there's times in which a kid has shown you they're not to be trusted. Like, I cannot take you out into public. Like, we can't go on this field trip, man. Like, this is not going to go well, right? And that's how I talk to the kid about it, is it really like, I'm honestly, like, I want you to be able to go, but I don't see how we can do this, when this, and this happened. And it's logical and they understand. They don't like it, but that is a sanction to think about. And what I would say, a lot of the logical kind of responses and consequences can come from loss of privilege. So here's some things what to do. Which privilege you restrict really matters. So think like a behaviorist. Make some changes in the kid's schedule or in their environment to make that problem behavior harder to do. So if they're vandalizing the bathroom, when they go to the bathroom during class, that kid has lost their privilege of being able to either go to the bathroom by themselves, they have to have an escort, or they don't have a daily bathroom pass, availability. They have to go during breaks and lunch, So you can set things like that up because the kid has shown that access to the bathroom unsupervised is not something they can handle. And that kind of thing. So thinking about, I've seen kids that like on recess, an elementary example, where they act like a wild thing when they're on the field, but if they're on the blacktop closer to the adults, they're fine. I think it's just kind of thinking about like, where are they more successful, removing the area or the time where they're not for a while. And then and then we'll talk about ways to like bring it back. That's the last point. The next one is kind of, and it's a terrible analogy, but I was raised, it's called the short leash program. And the idea is that, essentially the original version was, look, bud, I think I need you where I can see you, because when I can't see you, problems happen. So I need you between here and here and here and here during break or during lunch, So like we had a kid that this is a high school example. He was an 11th grader and he was recruiting the 9th graders for his gang. And he was hanging out at this 9th grade table. Well, he needed to not be allowed to go into those areas because he couldn't be trusted to be responsible, respectful, and safe. So he needed to stay in an area that he could be supervised by the campus supervisors every day. And it wasn't that he couldn't have lunch and hang out with his friends, but it needed to be between here and here and here and here. Like, this is the boundary. Younger kids, I need you can be on, the basketball court, and you can be in the, jungle gym, you can be here, but you can't be out on the field. I need you where I can see you. So the short leash, if you think about any time we kind of restrict their freedom, it would kind of be a short leash type of thing. So backpack checks is a logical thing to do for kids that bring things to school that they shouldn't, or steal things from school that they shouldn't. And that can be something that I need you to check in with me. We're going to check your backpack in the morning, at lunch, afternoon, before you go. I worked in group homes, so we had kids that they didn't have a backpack. And we even had kids that didn't have pockets. So, like when you go to the extreme, like they would in the group, like literally like have to sew their pockets shut because they just couldn't help themselves from taking things. And it helped them.
Ask a quick question, just about
Yeah.
the backpack checks to Kelly or you. We had a student who kept bringing apples on the bus, and then there was apples everywhere on the bus every day. And so I was talking to the teacher about not letting the student take the fresh fruit home. And so she said, well, I've just been checking his backpack every day. Is that something that is it a search thing, or do we have to have in writing that we're doing a daily backpack check and really he's just opening his backpack and she's like, okay, it looks good, go get on the bus. But is that something that I should have like a formal plan?
I think if the way you're describing it in terms of if she's saying, hey, can you show me that you don't have anything in your backpack, and the student complies, then you're fine with that. But the minute that she says, no, I'm going to search your backpack before you leave, then we have to follow our search policy. And so then if it's one of those kids that we say, no, we're going to daily open up your bag and search it, like whether you really want to or not, you're going to do this, then we have to follow our search process. And in order to prevent filling out that search form every time, that's when you put it into a behavior plan. Okay. And that way, then it's documented in the behavior plan that there will be regular bag checks, daily bag checks, whatever.
Okay.
So, but if she's just saying, hey, ready to go on the bus, show me that your bag is safe and ready, and the kids go like this, then.
And the mom is aware of it because the mom's been doing it in the morning too and checking. So I just wanted to make sure she did it the other day, and I was like, ooh, are we?
I guess the question would be like, if the kid says, no, I'm not going to show you my bag, then, he probably has that. That's when you would want to move to like putting it in as a formalized plan.
Okay.
But if he's compliant
and this situation, I don't know that I would. I get that you're trying to prevent that, but having an apple in your bag is not a problem. Right? So we want to address the behavior where it's the problem. The problem is leaving trash behind in the bus, right? I would be more likely to have the driver and him do a quick check under that he left a clean area, just like we do at lunch tables, and then let him go. But maybe the driver doesn't want to do that. That could be what's happening too. So the short leash program, think about mainly it was a restricted area that the kid could hang out, that's originally, but you could also look at sitting closer to the adults. The thing is like sitting close to the bus driver. That might be one thing I would do is that kid, he sits by the bus driver, before he leaves, he just checks underneath. Okay, good to see you. Good job, Joey. And the whole thing's over, right? Because having an apple in his bag is no problem. He's probably leaving it because he's mad at the bus driver because the relationship is poor. Because that's not a normal, annoying, to do it every day, that he's doing it on purpose. So I think it's a relationship problem, probably with the bus driver, that needs to be sorted. But think about like seating, think about adult escorts to the bathroom if the kid can't be trusted, like I said, to go in the bathroom without vaping or whatever. Those are all things that are privileges, like being able to go independently around campus. Kids that are trusted have that. That you can do that. And the truth is there's just kids behave better when there's adults around. And some kids really need close proximity of adults in their lives. It's not all bad. I've had kids do regular check-ins throughout the day with me or the principal or a caring adult. Like, how are they feeling? How are they doing? Have they had any bullying problems? Like they just need more contact with us. So a short leash program isn't really like they're a dog or something, but it's the idea that like they need more care and they need us more. And those touch points throughout the day. So definitely with things like, the way you deliver it matters. So it's like, and Kelly kind of modeled the backpack check to be really like, is it safe? Are you ready? Like being positive when you're around the kid is the most important part of this. It should not be punishing. Like I have one of my favorite principals have regular consequence. He had kids picking up trash and he would walk with them during recess and together they would talk and pick up trash and spend time together. And it was a total intervention. And those kids would do anything for Mr. Silva. And, it's all about how you do this stuff. It's not actually about the thing. And that's why loss of privileges is so tricky for people, because if you hammer down and you're like trying to be punishing about it, it can be really horrible and not restorative at all. So think about that. The last point here is to set up a way for the student to earn the privilege back. So I did Love and Logic as a parent, a young parent, and that's like a parenting class you can take. And they were really like all about like, don't ground a kid for 2 weeks. You don't know if the problem is solved in 2 weeks or 2 days. Like it's up to the kid, like when they're ready. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's right. Like, why am I predisposing this was going to be this long until we fix it, So I like to put it on the kid. So, okay, right now, playing on the field is not your strong suit. Let's stay on the blacktop where we're near each other. I can help you. You can come talk to me. And then let's check back. You let me know when you think you're ready to go play on the field again. And then we'll make a plan for getting you back on the field. Okay. And then you might even set up an appointment. Should we check in on Friday about that? Do you think that's a good idea? And then like involve them in earning the privilege back. When do we need to not look in your backpacks anymore? Right. When do you think you're going to be able to sit in a different part of the bus? And you just ask them and you make a plan together of earning that back. And it's really powerful. So what are your thoughts about loss of privileges, the do's and don'ts? This is really a tricky thing to do well, but I feel like it's a very viable alternative to exclusionary discipline, and it's very behavioral in nature. So tell me your thoughts. I could be all wrong. I just did it a lot.
I'm really liking the idea of restricting the reset. So here, let me explain the whole thing. I have a couple of students who, when they play on the playground, they're very unsafe. And so I've been doing lessons with them on how to play safely. And, but that's constantly taking an adult away that's following that child around, helping them play safe, because I don't like to take the recess away.
Yeah.
So, and it's not necessarily solving the problem yet. So I like this idea of here's a place you've shown you can be safe versus, and now it's not requiring a whole nother adult to complete that task on a daily basis.
And they're not always in trouble.
Exactly.
Yeah, it could be a stepping stone. Okay, now you've shown, I love how you phrase that. I had a funny one once. So I had this 3rd grade boy who was constantly like beating up other people out on the playground. Like it was like rough, teasing them, bullying them. Obviously had a lot of home problems. And he, what we did is he had to, at the end of recess, like we worked like kind of toward this. Once he got freedom, and we gave the privilege back. He could be other places. Then what he had to do is we had a little point sheet. he'd walk up, have to bring a buddy or two to the yard duty and report back how recess went. I was safe. I was kind. They, and the other two kids would be like, yeah, he was all right. It was okay. And I mean, but he was a little tough. So we were like, is he going to like bully the other kids into coming up with him or not? But it worked out fine that he just got peers to kind of vouch for him that it was going well. But that didn't last very long either, right? Like it's, step by step. And if then you just kind of go back to like, hey, do you think you were doing better when you were only playing here? Should we try that again? And include them in the discussion. So this is, and there's a lot around loss of privileges that I've used. It's just more logical to me. It's more immediate. You can manage it better, and you're not taking away everything good in their life. And they're so motivated to get their privileges back that they want to work with you. So, but again, I don't say you're off of the swings for 2 weeks. I say, like, you come and tell me when you think you're ready to be on the swings again, and we'll talk about it, right? But if you're going to do these kinds of things, take a lot of coordination with all the staff. Everyone out there has to know where he's allowed to play. Everyone out there has to know about the backpack check, all of that. So this is definitely kind of a tier 3 thing, really, because essentially it could even be, this all could be written in a behavior plan. So thinking about that. So yeah, I guess we talked about that, but let's do a quick discussion. How can you use loss of privileges as a sanction in lieu of exclusionary practices? So I want you to kind of turn to each other. Now, while you talk, if you could pull out the guide that Kelly printed out for you, and it's also the download of the day. And I want you to talk to your partner about, could you begin to do some of these? You are welcome to give that guide out or talk about it with your staff as well. So just have a short conversation about like some easy things you could do to start to do this in lieu of an exclusionary practice. Okay. All right. Let's come on back. Let's do a share out of what came up in your conversations for you. Looks like we had 2 different groups talking. So go ahead and share one person per group.
I can share mine. Last year, we had a 6th grader who was wandering a lot and wasting quite a bit of time in the hallway. And so there also was graffiti in the bathroom at the same time quite often. And so we put an escort system in place where he wasn't to leave the classroom unless it was me or the student support facilitator or Ms. Bostwick. Those were the only 3. And he really quickly didn't have to go to the bathroom.
And did it help with the graffiti?
Yes, it helped quickly. I just a couple days of it, and he wanted to earn it back. He was like, can I try tomorrow to just not have an escort? And was like, okay, well, let's try, let's see. And he didn't go to the bathroom as often and stuck with it.
Oh, that's great. Good story. Next, another group.
Well, we kind of have different problems up at the middle school and high school. We have a lot of tardies and not so much in the middle school tardies and skipping, but a lot of the high schoolers, they're on our radar for skipping. And, right now, and I know this isn't the perfect solution, but we have to do something. So right now we have lunch detention because if they're late, especially coming back from lunch, to me, that seems like a natural consequence. You lose your opportunity to go off campus for lunch. The problem that we have is monitoring that because it's a very large building and there's lots of different exits for the kids to just like, got an orange slip, rip it up and walk out the door anyway. We do have a check-in policy at the library, and Patty, documents who showed and who didn't show, but that's the ongoing issue for me in attendance. And how do I hold these kids accountable? What is logical? What seems reasonable? And why, when do you, I guess, take it to the next level? If they do just skip lunch detention, is in-school suspension an option? Well, then they're losing instruction time. It's like, got to do something until we can figure out what works and what is the most logical thing to do. So, I mean,
I think that it's very logical that if we can't trust you to go get lunch and come back to school on time, then you probably shouldn't go off campus. That until you can get responsible enough to do that. That's very logical to me. And I don't think it's bad. I don't know if I'd call it detention, but just you're eating here. And so some schools have an off-campus pass that people have, but then they still hide people in the back of their car, but they have to go to more effort for things like that. Closed campus is easier, but then causes other issues. And yeah, you don't want, when there's attendance issues, at least in some states, like in California, you cannot ultimately suspend a kid for not coming to school. right? Like, and that used to be legal, but now it's not. So, and that, because that makes sense. Like, you're coming late, so now you're going to have to miss class and sit in the office, and we wouldn't want to do that. So it's really about getting with that kid and figuring out what's happening, what's going on. So yeah, I think it's a tricky one, and likely it's just a couple kids that you're kind of playing that game with in terms of like figuring out. You don't have to set up school-wide systems. This is one thing that always helped me. You don't have to set up your whole school system contingent upon those two kids that aren't doing well. You can still run it for everyone, and then those two kids, we're going to do something different for them. But it's very logical that if you can't come back on time, you probably shouldn't go. I mean, and then you come tell me when you think you can be responsible about lunch, because it is a privilege to go off campus. It is. That's not necessarily part of their scheduled day. They need a break and they need lunch, but they don't need to walk the streets of your city.
I was saying with Summer that it seems like kind of what we do a lot right now, because it's that logical consequence piece, right? And so like with the playground and just breaking it up into 4 zones and then reteaching the expectation for one zone and allowing them there for a while. And if they're successful, add a second. I mean, all of those things are logical. And I think there are a lot of things that we are doing.
Yeah. Excellent.
I think the challenge is, like you said, like having all of the staff on board and aware and remembering that this student can't do this and this student isn't supposed to be, just like that piece of juggling becomes tricky.
Balance.
Yeah. And again, I think also the way you talk to the kid about it is probably the most important part. It has to feel collaborative and restorative. So it's a challenge. Okay, let's talk about something else you can do. Part of restorative practices is the idea of restitution. So the idea here is that upon finishing a restorative conversation, erase what's lost, repair something broken. And often in very serious situations, it's super common to actually ask for compensation, reimbursement, something like that. So when I do the IIRP conferencing training that I deliver, the scenarios almost always involve a kid like returning the cell phone, paying back the $20 he stole, getting a part-time job to pay for the like painting over the graffiti. I mean, so in big incidences, it's not uncommon to hold a kid accountable and the family to pay things back, do things. Now, this is a tricky one in terms of like money and things like that in schools. So the only way this really works is when you have a proper restorative conference and everyone there, including parents, are agreeing to this plan. But it happens a lot in the end of a restorative conversation. So it's not the only thing you can do, but if there's actual damage or somebody was really like harmed or lost money or had to pay for something, often the person that did the harm and their family want to make it right at that point, and they'll offer things like that. So that happens in restorative practices. The other thing is community service. So depending upon like your state's rules, often it'll be like, it can't be shaming. You don't want to have community service in front of other people. So it would be like after school. But I think we use this a lot in when I was, running this program in my school district. So we would often create a school jobs list that kids could do as a privilege, but also things kids could do when they needed to get back to the community after they had done some sort of harm. So they can volunteer to help. They can do classroom beautification, campus beautification, help in the school garden. You've mentioned this, but like, the kids caught vaping in the bathroom. Well, they're going to make a presentation for the students on the dangers of vaping. We had some kids that were like outside the school boundaries in middle school. They were hanging out behind buildings, making out or whatever they were doing. And so the next day they did the PBIS lesson over the PA about what are the school boundaries, where are you allowed to be, right? It wasn't shaming, but they delivered the message. I've had kids help out in the front office because they were disruptive to the secretaries in the front office. I had a student that was really horrible. He blew out like in the front office, threw stuff, frighten the secretary. So the next day he did in-house suspension, and he spent his day making their day very pleasant. So he went to the garden, he picked fruit for them, he did copying, like it was kind of an in-house suspension, which he had to go to his core classes, but some of the day he spent giving back and repairing his relationships with the secretaries. I mean, I have like so many of these. I have kids that on the way home from school kicked down a fence of a neighbor. The principal walked the boys down the street when she found out. Knocked on the door, talked to the neighbors, had a restorative chat with the kids and the neighbor, and together they decided the kids would come for the next 2 Saturdays to help repaint the new fence. If it's done in collaboration and within a restorative conversation and everyone agrees, you're fine. You get into problems if you start like penalizing and giving fines to children for things, right? You can't do that kind of thing. Now there is like, oh, you didn't return your library book. I mean, I don't know how your district handles that, but some people like will ask the family to pay, but we're not in that business. We're not giving fines. We're asking people to sit together and talk about what do we need to do to make this right? And the person that did the harm is going to want to repair it by fixing things. And so a lot of this happens in the context of the conversations. One time we had our entire school football team on an away game. They trashed the bus, right? And so the bus came back into the yard. The bus driving, the supervisor there called the coach and said, "This is horrible. There's garbage. There's bodily fluids. It's disgusting." And so the coach texted all the players, "You need to be here at the bus yard in like 1 hour from now." And they literally stood in a circle. The bus driver, the supervisor talked about what happened, what they thought about it, how it impacted them. And the boys all agreed, "We want to help you." And they had already kind of cleaned that one. And so they just got and they cleaned like in a short amount of time, like the whole fleet of buses. The boys wanted to make it right. They felt really bad. They were just having a good time, blah, blah, blah. They didn't mean to impact these people and they felt bad and they offered it. So restorative practices is not traditional stuff, and it can be hard for people to swallow when things like that happen. So as a result of that football example, the next day, front page of the paper or in the editorial section or something, it said, blank high school students forced to do manual labor, right? And in the article, they talked about what happened. And basically, it was a couple parents that got upset. And in all of the letters to the editor after that, everyone in the community was 100% in support of the school, of the boys, like these kids made it right. It was a couple parents that hadn't been included in the conversation that got upset, but in the end, the community actually rallied and supported what the coach did. That the boys wanted to make it right, and it was an important thing. So as you do restorative practices, it can get messy, but many times people will want to actually fix what happened. Lots of times of kids helping the custodian after school, things like that, of fixing things, helping him, like they took away time. He had to spend extra time cleaning up their mess. So they're going to give back in another way. Right. And in general, parents are really supportive of that kind of thing. So restitution and taking active steps to make things right is a big part of restorative practices. And in fact, I recently read an article about, the ending of apartheid and the peace talks, and Desmond Tutu talking about that there was a translation issue that, and this was cultural, but that what the tribal people were asking for was restitution, steps to make things right. And what the Afrikaners were asking for was forgiveness, being absolved, right? But it was being translated the same. And for the tribal communities, it was really about, we want to see active steps to repair the harm, not just like you're off the hook, right? And so that's that idea in restorative practices. It's not about just say sorry, like then you don't feel bad anymore. It's like, what do we need to do to fix this? And we're going to do it, whatever it takes. And we want people to be reasonable, but so there's a long history of restitution culturally, other cultures as well. So that's really something to expect when you do restorative practices, that the outcome could be the kid does something, some kind of work. Any thoughts or questions about restitution?
I think it sends a message to the student on taking responsibility for their actions.
Mhm.
That's why I'm talking like with this lunch detention and in-school suspension, like is it really solving the problem? Like, especially with like repeat offenders and stuff. So I don't know, building on that is going to be my goal, my challenge, as we continue these conversations.
And some of these things are going to come easier to you than others. And then you start to stretch yourself. Okay, what can we do for this? That's more logical, linked, not punitive, and you broaden the way you think about things over time. Here's another one. We absolutely underutilize parents. Absolutely. Kids can call home to explain the incident directly to their parent. What happened in their own words. Really helps a lot, because then the parent's like on your side, right? They're not questioning the veracity of what you're telling them. Including parents in your restorative circles. It's, we're afraid to do it, but it's very powerful. You need training, you want to be trained in running circles so that it goes well. But don't be afraid to do it. It's incredibly helpful. I've run circles with parents, on both sides, and we work it out. Invite parents to shadow the student at school. I know, at least in California, that's written in ed code. It's allowed. And we never do it. We never invite the parent in to spend some time with their kid. I don't know, is that in the Oregon ed code at all? Do you know?
I think you have to pass a background check.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So my understanding is that if they have a visitor pass on, they can set it up and be in there as long as they're not in a supervising position of anyone. So they're just there to focus on their kids.
Yeah.
Not left alone.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, because you have parent volunteers all the time, and they could even just be a parent volunteer, spend more time with your kid in school, if you can. But yeah, I mean, as a consequence, as a sanction, I've seen like middle school, the parent comes, one day is all it took, I'll tell you, for that parent to come to school. And it's not meant to shame. It's really like, let's come all surround this kid, all hands on deck. We're going to be there for him. That a lot of what happens with kids is just this idea they don't feel seen. They do need more attention from us, from the people in their lives. And they need all of the grownups in their lives to be on the same page and get it together. And this can really help. So inviting the parent, we'd love for you to come. Is it possible? Right. And you have to know your parents and which one would that be helpful for. And if you can, invite like the other parent, the one that's less involved, if you can, could be really helpful. So if it's always mom you're talking to, see if dad can come, vice versa. Because often that could be the parent the kid feels disconnected with. So something to think about. So parent involvement is really powerful. So here are some examples, and I'll let you talk to your partner about this, of some non-exclusionary sanctions to consider based on, and you can develop your own table of these. So you have like a cheat sheet, but so for a fight, there's a lot of other things we can do than suspension. In my school district, we didn't automatically suspend for fights. If the kids could recover, meet up that day, resolve the conflict, they didn't go home. There's no need. What's the purpose? What's the function of that? So, here's some ideas. They still probably had other sanctions that they would do about, like, we had some kids, big old fight on the day that it was another middle school incident. And it was the day that the 5th grade parents were touring the middle school. So the kids got in the fight. After they resolved, they had their restorative conversation. The principal brought up, look, there were other people impacted by this. It was incredibly embarrassing for me as your principal that you made our school look like super scary place for all these parents. So what they agreed is that those kids were going to go to the next PTA meeting at the 5th grade at that school and apologize, and present about what a great school that they attended. So, thinking about, not suspending, sure, but there may be other things that you do instead. So take a look at this table, talk about it with your partner, and let's have a conversation about it. Okay. So what do you notice? What do you like? What might you try? Okay. So take a minute to talk about that. Okay, let's come on back, everybody. So let's talk about what came up in your conversation. So I gave you this kind of table to sort of look at, maybe developing something like this yourselves, or what do you think about something like this? I never used an actual table. I just thought of stuff, right? But maybe that would be helpful. But what came up as you were looking this over? You had very good discussions I could hear. Let's do a share out from each group.
I think for me personally, what I was talking about is I love this idea of creating these tables and having this go-to, because in the moment it's often difficult to come up with what works best. But there's also that part of we're dealing with students that are the exception. And so there's always that yeah, but that comes into place. And so that's where I'm trying not to live right now. And I keep falling into it. So that was my discussion, is how stuff.
Oh, this isn't going to work because such and such or whatever.
Right. Like, this is great. And here's why it doesn't work in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm drowning because of these 3 kids that it doesn't work with, right?
Yes, exactly.
One thing that I found really helpful, and I saw a lot of schools do, is just doing a lot more teaming around kids. So like I had one middle school that they made it their own internal policy. They weren't going to suspend anyone unless they ran the scenario by each other. Now, this is when they were doing a lot of suspending. But they would pop into each other's office like, hey, can I run this thing by you? And then they would get feedback and ideas. So just getting more support, someone else to run stuff through, a behavioral team person, if you have a psych, social worker, like run stuff by together, team around a kid, because you need the support with those 3 kids anyway. You shouldn't be working in isolation with them anyway, Yep. What else came up?
We had a really good discussion in kind of a roundabout way that really landed on relationships. So we talked, I guess, about a lot of different things and how, like, for classroom disruptions, it's sort of a combination of students are bored, or student, the work is too hard or too easy, coupled with a lack of relationship, because there's lots of kids who are bored that don't disrupt, and there's lots of kids who are struggling academically that don't disrupt. And so it's kind of, for me, the coupling of both. And so how do we support teachers in non-traditional ways to build that relationship with the few kids who are struggling, and then also in tier 1 ways as well. And then we're, a combination of secondary and elementary in our pair here. So it was good conversations on how it works in each of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, classroom circles are your best systematic way for teachers to build, relationships, whether it's kindergarten through 12th grade. And then when you have those restorative heart-to-hearts with kids that's deepening, your relationship, and those 2 tools, running circles as a class and then using the restorative conversations, are really important relationship builders. But having the kid come and volunteer in the classroom, help you out, could build relationships too. That's what we would do. Like if there was a consequence that the kid had to like clean in the classroom or help the teacher out, like we focused on making that as warm and supportive as possible. Their time with the custodian, like you described earlier, like they're buddies now, every time. It should be a bringing them back in type of experience, not a like, you're so bad you have to clean up by yourself. It's always like with an adult, it's a warm bonding experience. Do we have one more group to share? I think
We just talked about how with the bus, how that we're trying to infuse these kind of practices with bus when it's outside of our control a lot. So how we managing that and just the logistics that come with it, not that it's not possible, but just the logistics of people who aren't on your schedule. How do you have the restorative, the reteach of the behavior, the that piece when it's not someone in your building every day. So we just come talk through it.
Yeah, that's good. I know I was, I think having Kelly support on that, bringing the best people in so they know what you're doing You know what, like the things that could happen. And, you know, we had conversations in our school district, like with the custodians right off the bat, that there's going to be times that we might ask you to help us allow the kid to fix, repair, clean something. Are you on board? Because we were having issues with people saying, oh, that's a union issue. Job security, if we have kids cleaning up, that threatens our job security, which is just ridiculous, because everyone knows if you get kids to clean up, it's more work for you than if you do it yourself. You know, and all the custodians were like, absolutely happy to have kids help me out, let me know. They want to be partners in this. They could be a custodian at an office building and they're not. They could drive a city bus and they don't. They do it because they actually typically like kids and they want to be included in the solutions. So include your secretaries, let them be a check-in person for the kid. All of the people that we sort of sideline actually could be a really important person in that kid's life. And so bus drivers are no different. My favorite bus driver was Ray in elementary school. I still remember Ray, right? Every day, rode the bus 45 minutes there, 45 minutes back. That's not nothing in a kid's life, you know? And setting that driver up for success with a kid and a bond is a good thing. Yeah. Okay. So developing maybe some sort of idea. I think, though, the way you deliver these things is so much more important than what they are, that sometimes kind of lists and charts can be a problem. So maybe, you know, if you think that could be a problem, then it's better to just generate the ideas in the context of your restorative conversations. So a sanction is only restorative when it's agreed upon by the people impacted. It can't be assigned or delivered in the office. Now, there's going to be times you just deliver or assign a sanction. If you do, fine. Try to make it fit the criteria, you know, like not shaming, not exclusionary, linked to the problem behavior, the things we talked about at the beginning. If you want it to be considered restorative, you have to bring people together. Meaning, in a practical sense, if kids are coming to the office because they're having a problem with their teacher, they were rude to their teacher or whatever, you actually cannot deliver any kind of sanction to them that's restorative unless you walk the kid back and have a restorative conversation with the teacher. So that's where the restorative chat comes in. Rather than have them come all the way to you, you do the conversation in the office, and then they just go to the classroom. It's faster. You just, like, the teacher calls, you show up, pick up the kid. That's what we talked about last time. It's just more efficient. And that's if you're aiming to be more restorative, you have to involve both people. You cannot just assign something in your office and think that that's going to be restorative, right? It's not going to work that way. So restorative consequences, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to assist the kids in considering ways to make amends, maybe before they come back together with that person. Replacing something, repairing something like we talked about. So something you can think about is like, well, if what they did just took a lot of time from that adult, they can give time back by helping them out in whatever way that person says would be helpful. So maybe they can't fix the actual problem, but they can do some things to make it better. They're, you know, things just better for that teacher, making copies, stapling, cleaning things, stacking things, just being a helper, cleaning the whiteboard, cleaning, you know, we used to do when we were kids, we'd clean out the chalk, erasers and stuff. There's a lot of things kids can do to just make things better. We have that concept, though, of a school job and a job that's a consequence. The way that I was taught the difference when we had a University of Oregon researcher out, and he said that a privilege is something the kid chooses what that's going to be. Say they're going to go and help out at recess. They get to leave 5 minutes early, put on their vest, right, and go on out there. And that's what they chose, right? They get to do that. If it's a consequence, then you tell the kid what it's going to be, when to do it, how to do it, when to report back, right? But we had situations where we literally had kids, they loved doing this as elementary school. They'd put on the vest, they'd have a broom, and they would be brushing the bark back into the bark box. And you would have kids next to them that were doing it as a consequence. it can all work, right? The kids that were, it was like a privilege, they would be ball monitors, things like that. Other kids give back because like they need to show that they can give back and take care, like go help out at the kindergarten recess, right? It's all valid. So we want to help kids think about that and don't get so fixed in our mind that there's school jobs or privileges and school jobs or consequences. It can be both. Also, sincere apologies are still on the table. It has to be sincere and it has to be something that the people involved want. So I have a little guide for you. And of course, shaming and embarrassing people, not restorative. Any kind of, if you find that the adults are doing more talking than the kids and the tone is scolding and lecturing, then it's not restorative. Like, and one of you said that earlier, I just sit back and let the kid do the talking, right? Get out of the way. If you use the restorative questions right, then you're not doing much talking at all. Consequences not linked to behavior, yelling, those things aren't restorative. Okay, so a restorative apology, here's a bus example for you. And I actually have this in your handout because it's a real situation. So if you want to help a kid apologize for a situation, it can help if you kind of prep them and teach them how to apologize. And by the way, this works with our loved ones, partners, kids as well. You want to tell what you did without equivocating, right? You're going to take responsibility for what you did. You want to maybe say how it might have made the other person feel. If you're doing it in person, then they can ask, that might have made you feel unappreciated. Is that right? You know? And then tell the person how you feel about that, about how the other person feels, and make a promise. So here's our cute example. This is a 6th grade boy, and he's writing a letter of apology to the bus driver, and he is facing a suspension from the bus, okay? Dear bus driver, I got in a fight with another student on your bus. I am very sorry about my actions. Because of me, you must have felt nerves, stressed, and maybe even unsafe. If you wouldn't have been there to stop the fight, I believe it might have gotten out of hand. So I would like to apologize for fighting on your bus. I must have made you feel very terrible. It must be very hard to drive a bunch of kids who hardly ever stop making noise. So from now on, I promise to keep my hands to myself at all times. I also promise to do my part of taking care of the bus. From Joshua. All right. So do you see the components of a restorative apology that Joshua used there and why this is like a rockin' apology? He didn't say, I'm sorry if you were upset, right? There's no if in a real apology. We don't say I'm sorry if you were, upset by that. So what do you notice about this? What comes to mind when you're reading this from the 6th grader?
I love the make a promise at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, they're making it like a commitment, right?
Action plan. Yeah.
Commitment.
Love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so, the ending of it, and this is restorative practices, you always end the last question is all about moving forward. How are we going to move forward without recurrence of the problem, right? That's sometimes people end conferences like that. So it's like, what do we need to do to make it right? That's a forward-seeking question. This apology, it's the end is moving forward. This is what I commit to doing. And it's so positive and it gives like that kid more power back, And I just think it's such a strong way to end and so like positive and healthy and empowering for the child. So you have this as a handout. I encourage you to try, if an apology is what seems to be in order. I typically wouldn't recommend an apology for a lot of the time teachers, they don't want to get these in their box. They'd rather have a conversation because they think it's not sincere, I also think this took a lot of work on an adult. Some adult in this kid's life spent a lot of time helping him with this, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But you know what? If we all did this and we said sorry to people we care about, our relationships would be a lot better. Right? Okay. So we're going to skip this bit. So I just, in the end, kind of to reflect at the end, I want you to talk with your partner about the types of sanctions. We talked about a lot of things today. We talked about restitution, loss of privileges, apologies, involving parents. Like there's so many things we can do other than excluding kids, right? So what was brought up today that you think I'm going to try that? So I want you to talk to your partner, and then we're going to share out, and everybody's kind of our checkout question is what kinds of sanctions you want to use. Okay. Or think about trying to use. So talk to your partner first, and then we'll do a checkout question with that. All right, everybody, in the interest of time, I want to honor everybody's time. Let's do our checkout. Okay. So what we're going to do is you can stay seated, but we're going to go around the circle, and I want you to name one thing you're going to rethink around sanctions, something you're going to try to do differently or try to add into your repertoire from today's conversation. Okay. We'll have one person start, and then you'll tell us what direction we're going. Who feels ready to start?
I'll start. I feel very motivated to do some work with our staff on like what loss of privileges are and what they aren't, and like the taking fun stuff away. And I know we always have a lot of pushback around field trips and stuff, and just really talking through what that means with them and making plans to do something different.
Good. And the guide I gave you that way you don't have to remember everything I said. And also this video, I think it'll be on YouTube. So you'll be able to like just show part of it if you want, but just with the handout, that'll help you have that conversation with them, I think. Okay. Next person.
I was thinking, well, there's a lot, but some of it's just around organizing how we've been responding and where the restorative questions fit and where the sanctions fit. And it also just helped me process. I'm thinking more about like the example Ashley and I was talking about was the recess one, right? That it doesn't have to be a sanction of no recess. It can be what part of recess are you successful at? So that's just helping my brain process how I can move forward with this.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, mine are very similar. There's a lot, just calibrating what we all understand about even a right and a privilege and a consequence. And is what we're doing a restorative piece, especially bringing in the parent piece and parent involvement in that.
You're good. I want to hear it. If you do anything creative around that, I want to hear the story, because a lot of people are not using parents as much as we could. All right. Thank you.
I was the same as Ashley, just looking at loss of privilege, and instead of losing the privilege, coming up with a sanction that supports the learning that we want to take place. So instead of missing out on lunch, off campus lunch, I think you were talking about that, so I know where I was going. Like, okay, if our goal is to get you here on time, what can I do that helps them get there on time? That's not just a loss of privilege. So we're going to do that kind of stuff.
Okay. All right.
Mine's more, I think, on the restorative side, except for that this might be uncomfortable for a student, so it reaches into that sanction side of having some conversations with the student and the teacher and the parent, or even just like, and I'm thinking about just the repetitive disruptions or the eloping and things like that, where we have to call parents for support a lot. What would happen if we had like the child and the parent sit down and the parent explains to the child like how this impacts them to get calls, and how they have to come for support for clients and just different things like that. But then also, really cautioning this part where you said it's only restorative if it's agreed upon by the people who are, part of it, because a lot of times the kids don't want it. So how does we don't make it forced, like you will sit down with this teacher and your parent and have this conversation, right? Like, how do we make it so that it's not forced?
I mean, the thing with that is you can have like an expectation for your teachers, right? Because you work here. This is our value system that when there's conflict, we do sit down with people and we'll support you in that. I'm not really for making it super optional for teachers, because we are doing this together, but we don't force like kids and parents into restorative conversations if they really don't want to, or teachers for that matter, but you can set up the expectation and then work with them to get there.
I had a couple thoughts. You said maybe not calling it lunch detention. I was like, well, what if I rephrase it and call it lunch connection? And then I participate in that 30 minutes up there in the library or wherever they are. But then I kind of built, as everybody was talking, like, well, let's get the family on board. Maybe, the parent comes in, and they take away time out of their day to help support
what we're trying to get the student to do. And then like you said, the parent could talk about how this impacts their day. They have, almost all of our parents have jobs and, can't take time away from their jobs to, address issues at school all day, often.
I think that like I have a lot of examples of restorative things that once you brought the parent in, they have all other ideas. We had a third grade boy that came and vandalized at school over the weekend. Like, not good. They had a restorative meeting, involved the dad. The dad was a landscaper. And so he spent with his kid like 2 or 3 weekends helping put in the whole garden project at the school. And the kid, when asked, like, what did you learn from this experience? Like, he was so proud of his dad and so proud of himself. Like, the whole thing was like, I'm giving back to my school. My dad's now part of this school. I've never seen my dad at school. Like, we are missing the boat when we don't involve our parents. We really are. They're like such assets for us if we approach it restoratively. We just have to give them a chance sometimes, Excellent. So you never know what'll happen if you invite them. That's what I'm saying. You might end up with a new library aide. You never know. Kelly, anything from you?
Oh, just listening to Summer speak about high school stuff is just reminded me, like, I really would love to move forward with some sort of it kind of goes into intervention for next time, but for the cell phone usage, because like kids are so addicted to it that they can't even like separate themselves from it. And then if a parent is saying, but it's their comfort thing, like I'm not going to make them leave it at home, then what can we do at school to intervene and teach that?
Thank you so much for a great like work group that we've done together. When we get back together, we're going to be talking about interventions as kind of the last piece of the puzzle when we respond. All right. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.